Hello and welcome to all of you here and to our online audience to this 8th week in the thematic weeks of Expo 2020, which is Health and Wellness Week. My name is Federica Busa and I have the honor to moderate today's conversation here at Terra, the Sustainability Pavilion, and what better place to talk about the well-being of our planet and the well-being of people in this incredible setting. And to begin with, I would like to thank our friends from Portugal and from Switzerland Pavilion who have helped organize and bring together this wonderful group of people here today. And before I introduce the participants, I would like to give the floor to Manuel Sackley, the Commissioner General of Switzerland.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Federica and your team for hosting together with us this yet another World Majlis, which I'm very honored to open. This flagship event is a vital platform for our joint efforts at Expo, connecting minds, creating the future. I would like to thank you for helping us to build vital links with the world to put forward our mission of building together a better future. Public health is about prolonging and improving quality of life through organized efforts and informed choices of individuals and society at large. It is at the heart of the United Nations 17 SDGs. We cannot speak about public health without discussing SDGs. Raising awareness of it is more important than ever, was mentioned before, particularly in view of the recent global pandemic that is still keeping us busy, unfortunately. For the Health and Wellness Week, a thematic week of Expo 2020, the Swiss Pavilion is very happy to host the Swiss School of Public Health, SSPH+. It assembles the faculties of public health sciences affiliated with the 12 Swiss universities. It is the national coordinating body for the promotion of postgraduate education and research in the field of public health. Professor Nino Künzli, our speaker for the event, is its director. The SSPH Plus at the Swiss Pavilion is showcasing the link between public health and all the SDGs. It is doing so by putting forward the work of the next generation of scientists. All of their content was conceived with the heavy involvement of students. Their current exhibition at our pavilion was also designed by students from the Supsi University in Italian-speaking Switzerland. Last but not least, their presence at Expo also includes an artistic interpretation of sustainability, thanks to the performers of the Accademia Teatro Dimitri, which you will also be enjoying tonight. With these words, I would like to wish you a very successful event. Once again, I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
And thank you. So today's conversation is really about this inseparable bond between the health of our planet, the health of people, but also the spaces that we build, the space we live in, and the spaces we work. And it's not just about finding a way of coexisting with our planet, but also how we can build environments and communities where we and our planet can thrive, and in many cases, maybe even heal. Uncle, yes.
My name is Angangak, and it means the man who looks like his uncle. I was named after my father's older brother. His name is Kuyagi, which means the beloved one. He was named after his uncle Angangak, who was named after his uncle Kuyagi. So I'm pretty old, but because I use L'Oreal, I don't look so old. I just forgot my lipstick. But I'm so happy to be in United Arab Emirates. I'm so honored that I was invited to come here. I want to greet you in my tradition with my instrument of qilaut, which is an instrument from the great sky. They say that in our human beingness, my health not only depends on my well-being physically, but also spiritually. Those two cannot exist without each other. You're not only your body, but you're also your spirit. So this is the way it is. And the old people say that time has come for you and I to melt the ice in our heart. They say that only by melting the ice in our heart, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. And I noticed since I arrived here in Dubai, the enormity of the wisdom or the enormity of the knowledge. Can you imagine that when that knowledge becomes wisdom? What a change it will be for all of us. This is the way. Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho! Welcome home.
And thank you for helping, trying to make a connection between our mind and our heart. And I think it's all about connections today. And I'm delighted to now introduce our panel. Agankak, who now needs no longer an introduction and to whom we will refer to as Uncle. To my right, he's a traditional healer, a spiritual teacher, and a shaman joining us from Greenland. And we'll learn more about his culture and the view of the world from one of the most expansive pieces of land or ice on Earth. Professor Nino Kunzli, from the Dean of the School of Public Health in Switzerland. Habiba Al-Marashi, who is the co-founder and chairperson of Emirates Environmental Group. And Royal Pineda, architect from the Philippines and the designer of the Philippine Pavilion. To my left, Joaquim Cunha, the CEO of the Health Cluster, joining us from Portugal. David Harland, CEO of Eden Project from the UK. Dr. Tom Loney, from Associate Professor of Public Health and Epidemiology at Mohammed bin Rashid University. And last but not least, Ahmed Bukash, who also is an architect and designer of Expo Life Pavilion here in the Opportunity area, but today is also here as Director of Urban Planning at the Dubai Development Authority. So a very, very diverse group of people, but we're certainly learning more and more that this conversation about how we create healthier spaces needs to come out of the silos where things are happening. And as I was saying before, we are at the 8th thematic week, and this particular topic of conversation is actually bringing together what we have learned from our first week at Expo on climate and biodiversity, and the third week at Expo, which was urban and rural development. And it really brings together a lot of those learning. And there's two things that we have learned at that point. One, that we need holistic and integrated approach to how we design and build and operate the communities of the future. And that the changes that we are required today, it's not just a matter of creating a better widget. It's not just a matter of saying we are, creating less pollution and then we change from, cars that are fueled by petrol to electric vehicles. We need to start thinking really fundamentally how we ask different questions so that we can have much more impactful solutions. And before I, again, give the floor, I think it's really important also to say that Terra and this connection between our health and the health of the planet are intrinsically connected in Terra, and David's organization was very, very involved in the early days of us finding what kind of story is this pavilion telling. And this pavilion relied, first of all, on the science of planetary boundaries, which it's an important piece of scientific work that established the measures and the thresholds that we cannot go beyond. And otherwise, we have really not a negative impact on our planet at all, but the whole connection with Terra was how those changes would actually impact our own well-being. So as we kick off this conversation, I would like to start with the scientists in this Majlis, Professor Nino first, and then Professor Tom afterwards. What have we learned about the science, and what do we know about the status of our health and our spaces?
Well, Frederica, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity talking about this very important topic in this field. And as actually Michael mentioned in the very beginning, if you look for the right science for health, you must understand that health has so many dimensions. And now the epidemic, the pandemic has actually shown us, to everybody, which the public health scientists knew already before, it is multidimensional. So the science must approach health from all these sides. And that's actually the reason why the Swiss School of Public Health is organized the way we are. We don't have a roof, because none of our Swiss universities have a critical mass to reunite all the sciences you need. We have more than 40 different fields of scientists in the Swiss School of Public Health network. So, I mean, we have health lawyers, we have health economists, we have biologists, virologists. I'm an environmental epidemiologist, and you could go on. And actually, from University Zurich, who is dean of the medical faculty, I think sits even here, Zurich has a theologist who does spirituality and health. So we embrace health from all sides, and that's why we believe all SDGs do relate to health. And I don't want to go through the 17 now. I just want to emphasize what public health sciences do know. On the very top, most important health-relevant aspects which you need to consider in also planning cities is poverty. There is no health with poverty. And then, of course, you have all these other dimensions. You have the environmental dimensions, which, as mentioned for me, that is part of my science, air pollution, and on and on. And then you need this lifestyle aspect where the cities need to embrace the ability to live healthy, so to embrace the healthy lifestyles. And this is, of course, we will come back to this discussion, because this is all relevant to our mental health, to our physical health, and to the way we can actually work together and live together, which is very relevant for health. So I want to stop here just as a startup to remind us SDGs is related to health on all dimensions.
So it's quite an holistic view of science. Professor Professor Tom.
So thank you very much, Nino and Frederica. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. So I think just to follow on, I think, humans, we are designed to be in nature. And I think, I'm an epidemiologist, so I look for relationships between exposures and outcomes. So if we think about nature as an exposure, or being out in nature as an exposure, and how that might be linked to different health outcomes, both physical, mental, and also spiritual. So some of the early evidence showing the positive effect of nature on health would come from patients. And early trials back in the 1980s in the US in hospitals, if patients had a view out of their window of a forest or the countryside compared to other patients that would have a view over, say, an urban landscape or maybe buildings, you found generally lower. So these would be patients that would be post-op, so they're recovering from various surgeries, whether it be heart bypass or knee replacements. And what the data generally showed there was a reduction in self-reported pain, medication use, complaints to the nurses, but also lower things like cortisol, which is a measure of stress, and a reduced time in hospital for those patients that had the view of nature. And then, various research groups around the world have followed this up with some clinical trials, some experiments, where they had some people that walked on treadmills where they were facing a brick wall, another group that were walking a treadmill that viewed a forest or a nice alpine setting or the desert on a TV, and another group that actually walked through a forest. So they each did 30 minutes of walking, and what you tend to see is that the physiological benefits were greater in the group that walked outside than in the group that had the perception, or at least the view of nature, and then the lowest, although there still were some improvements, in the group that were looking at the brick wall. So I think that's some interesting evidence, and I think we'll build upon this as we go through the Majlis about the importance of our interactions with nature throughout our daily lives. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
And in fact, nature and the city seems to be always contradictory terms, and we'll come to our urban planners in a minute. But I wanted to go to Joachim, who heads up the health cluster. And so we'll remain for a moment in the space of science and technology and innovation. What do you observe when we look at health and our spaces where we live and work?
Thank you very much for this invitation, and it's really a nice pleasure to be with a so different and complete panel in a very important issue. We are, at least I think, or I want to think, in borders of a new health. I would like to say a smarter health that will perform a disruptive evolution from the health we know today. And we have to say that the health we know today is perhaps one of the biggest achievements of mankind. And what will be this new health, or this smarter health? I think it has to be, in fact, not only in words, really focused and centered on the patient, on the citizen. Not hospitalocentric, but distributed, privileging home care and having in hospitals only those who really need it to be there. Designed, in opposite, to answer mostly to chronic diseases, instead of the current offer basically designed to solve acute episodes. As you know, this design of the actual health systems, at least all over Europe, where I come from, they were made after the World War II, and they were focused on targeting acute episodes. Nowadays, the problem is in chronic disease. Is there that we have our, as a citizen, where are my concerns? Because at my age and upper, everybody has 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 aliens at the same time. And it is the burden of the costs for the government and only for us. So it's important that perhaps we evolve something where everybody is linked. The technology allows that. Everybody is remotely monitorized. Of course, oriented to health and not to illness. Focus for that. Focus on prevention and on prediction. Because, as you know, more and more health ecosystems are enlarging, are involving contiguous areas as food, nutrition, well-being, sports, and in my humble opinion, correctly. With new answers and solutions, bringing more attention for our lifestyles. Because as you know, most of our health problems comes from the way we decided to live our lives. Sometimes not in the very positive options. So it is completely, in my opinion, a new paradigm. If we take it and consider it in a serious way, of course. And I have some hope for sure that this could happen, because in my opinion, it's good news. And this is completely aligned with the discussion that we have here today.
So certainly lifestyle is coming back to this. Let's not just, look at the acute, maybe in a centralized hospital versus how the way the community is organized, the way our buildings are organized can become part of a different way of looking at our spaces. And I would like to go first to Abiba and afterwards to Ahmed. You are looking at green buildings. You're big champions of, built environments. So we will have to come back to the green spaces as well and the balance of the two. But certainly, how can the buildings we live in actually contribute to our health? And how do you look at it?
Thank you very much, Frederica. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. These are the spaces that we spend most of our times in. Research shows that more than 70% of our time is spent inside. And if you take the malls and the transportation, it goes up to 90% of our time spent in an indoor environment. So we have to understand what goes on in really the building to ensure that we are doing the right thing. It's not enough just to have a beautiful aesthetic side of it. You have to understand the workings of that inside space. As human beings, we like to have our own privacy, the connectivity with the members of our family, our colleagues, and we want to ensure that we are shielded from the outside elements of nature. So to look at how we can live in a place that will really not affect us mentally, socially, health-wise, and at the same time provide us what we want, is very important to look at all the elements. And I'm very proud to say that the work that is happening on the ground in the United Arab Emirates in the last 15 years has come a long way in particularly focusing on indoor air quality. Indoor air quality is one of the important things that we are focusing on, and I think with COVID-19 it has come to the forefront because they found that if there's poor circulation in a building, it becomes more prone, you are becoming more prone to diseases, illnesses, to the spread of contagious diseases like it has happened, and we saw that. So this has brought to the focus and to the forefront the importance of understanding that issue. Again, of understanding what materials we are putting in our buildings, So there's a lot of science that is going on at the moment to ensure that we are building spaces that are healthy, that will enhance our quality of life and not vice versa. And they found that places that are congested, places that have poor ventilation and they are out of the system, have the spread of the pandemic and the diseases was much faster than in places. It does not mean if a city is congested, that is a destiny that they are going to have the diseases. If it is planned properly, then of course the scenario is different. So today when we are looking at our buildings, whether for living or for working or for studying, we have to ensure that all these elements are taken into consideration. The energy efficiency, the rays that comes from the building material that has gone, the paints and every fixtures and all these kind of things, to understand that science and to see how it impacts the human beings, not only on the health, but on the mental health as well. That is very important, which may not come at the forefront in the beginning. To have the right kind of laws, to have the right type of regulations, legislations that really ensures that what we are building is sustainable. When you build a building, you are not building it for 5 years. You are building for long term. So you have to ensure that everything goes in there correctly. You need all the players together. You know, you cannot say the architect, it's the only one that you need. You need the architects, you have the contractors, you have the MEPs, you have the government, you have every single entity that is involved to ensure that everything is done at the designing table before you go and you start and they say, oh, this is wrong. We need to go back to square number one. The way we were building our cities before were completely different than what is happening at the moment. There's a good knowledge that is coming out. We understand the impact of air pollution, outside air pollution on our health as well. So the amount of time that we spend on the roads in driving and being met with the congestions, with traffic jam and all that, and its impact on our health as well, and on the level of stresses, and that brings in another kind of diseases for the people. And you have to have these sessions of anger management and all this kind of thing. So when you look at it, it's really all connects with each other, and it all comes to how are we planning our abode? How are we planning our cities to be living, breathing, healthy surroundings for us? You mentioned about the green. Yes, green is the most soothing color really for human beings. So having, trees around you, having greenery around you is much better than having all grays on everything, on alertness, on the level of productivity. That's why you are encouraged to have indoor plants in any working environment so that, they act as pure cleaners, purifiers of the air within the built environment. And these are things that people do not notice about it. But this is very important when you are planning the indoor space for your workers, to ensure that you are providing them with a healthy working environment so that they can be productive. And of course, it adds benefit to the thing. And this subject is so huge, but I will stop here.
It's this figure I find a little wow. 70% of actually the time we spend indoor, and we have actually spent 100% of our time indoor during COVID, and a lot of that we've heard from previous of our also World Majlis participants saying that in that circumstance, buildings, were not adaptable to now these new requirements of becoming a bit of school, a bit of a workplace, and suddenly, you talked about poverty and people in circumstances that were not privileged circumstances. Where do they go? Where do they go inside a building? But sometimes, where do we go when we are outside on that other 30%? We're becoming increasingly urbanized, but is there some place to go when we go outside? Ahmed, floor is yours in terms of how do we, think about spaces that make room.
Thank you, Dr. Frederica, for the kind introduction. And I don't know if it's possible to share the images that I've shared.
If our technical team can, there we go.
Before we jump to, of course, me as an architect, I like to express solutions through physical built form. I'm just showing this as an example. It is one of our projects, but more importantly is we want to start with the core, because our firm belief is that we were living sustainably in the past. Maybe, along the road we kind of lost our way, but there's no reason why we cannot reconnect to that. And what I would like to convey is this is an example of a residential house. So during the design and execution process, we really researched about what things were really working and what things weren't working with a typical Emirati house. And the solutions we were surprised to find are actually affecting not only ourselves, but the global audience. And what I mean by that, if you go back to the principles of residential design in the Emirates, it's based on a precedence that may not be exactly sufficient to address our own local issues. What I mean by that is you normally look at it as more, you can say, efficient box with a front garden. And normally, due to our own privacy concerns, most of our front facades are closed up by curtains. So most of the day, you're actually in darkness. You use artificial lighting, despite of the fact that you have a front elevation. You have a lawn outside, which you're normally not very comfortable using because you have others staring at you. So if you go back to the principles of Al-Fahidi area, you will notice that actually the architecture and the language was very modest. It was homogeneous. You wouldn't be able to describe the beauty of one building to another simply because of the local identity, which was we need to live as a whole within a complex. And the beauty is always in the household, the sanctity of the family. So I just wanted to use this as an example because the outside residential facade actually is very private. It does look modern, but it's kind of abstracted and simplified. And if you'd be able to show the next slide, it's the total vast opposite. We have a reflecting pool, we have open glazed facades, and we also have flexible systems of louvers that open up and close, and also external curtains. So what I'm trying to convey is that we really need to start from the beginning. Before we get into the technology, before we get into the quality of the glass, if you don't get your foundation right, all technology does is enhance that. So if you get a strong principle, you will have in our environment, which is, you could say 6 months of the year is actually very pleasant, and the other 6 months is not very pleasant. But if you can ask design, if designed properly, you can always have indirect lighting and to make an outdoor space accessible all year round. And the same principle we need to adapt to our cities. We really need to go back and think of cities as a research and development facility. I know some developers that we have worked with, they have introduced gardens that work as deep gardens. So when there is, during the year, you know, when we get that once in a while heavy rains, the roads are not flooded. They actually sink into the central garden and get sucked in. So I just wanted to use that example, not to talk too long. But I think it's very important for us to translate words into action. And unfortunately, we need more research and development, because I think with research and development combined with local identity, you can reach solutions in an ever-expanding world where there is global warming, and you're living in a city which is one of the hottest in the world. So I think our solutions can actually benefit ourselves and the globe as a whole.
And I hope in the course of this Majlis, we'd like to come back to you and see how you take those great ideas that, you know, the house level and the home level to maybe the bigger scale of urban planning in Dubai. But talking from also starting from the beginning and going back to the roots, Uncle. You were talking to us about Greenland earlier, ground zero for climate change. But also, what are the lessons from living in some of probably the biggest wilderness, and how can we bring some of that spirit to our cities?
My old people, they say that you and I, we consist of our body, but that body has a mind, which is very independent from the body. But then we have a spirit, which is also very independent from the mind and the body. But then there's the fourth one. As you know, the earth goes around in four seasons. It's like when the baby is born, becomes a child and the young, the old, the adult and the old. So everything goes by four. And those four things inside us, the fourth one is the soul. They say that my health depends on my balance within myself. And when I ask, what does it really mean that I had to have a balance? And all people have a tendency to spread the wings and say, this is your spirit, which is closest to your heart. And this is your mind, far away from your heart. And this is your body. To be able to lift that, the wings had to be equally strong. Just like Emirates Airlines. If the wings are not equally strong, the airplane can never lift. Impossible. So that means the balance is really important. Not only that physical thing, but all aspects of that life I had to lead. Then, of course, environment I live in. I live in a very harsh environment. There was a really, really big ice on my land. When I was born, it was on the average up to 5 kilometers thick. In the course of 74 years, it's now less than 2 kilometers. So the environment you and I, we have created on Earth, the way you and I, we lived, has caused it to melt. Of course, weather has always changed, but we have never been so many as we are now. And the way we live impacts everything. That means it impacts my mental health, my psychological health, my physical health, my dietary health, everything. It impacts. So that means that in the world, and I have traveled a lot. I have worked physically in 75 different countries now. I realized it's not only back home in Greenland, but also everywhere else on Earth where I have traveled, we have lost balance. I cannot live alone as a human. Nor can you. We depend on the animal world we have. But we have lost contact with the animal world. If you go to the Western world, they only have a cat and a dog. That's all the animals they know about. But the animal world is a fascinating world. You cannot live without it. And then, of course, beside that, then comes that plant world. And you cannot live without it. But because the way we treated the earth, if you go to Italy, which one is from Italy?
Doctor.
You know, if you ever travel in Italy, you see only 4 kinds of grapes. There used to be many, many species of grapes, but we only used what's economically feasible. We lost the diversity. And that goes on all over the world. So we cannot live without the plant world. And it is so interesting. The environment, physical environment of the mineral world is also being affected. I have been to countries where they have raped the earth so badly that it destroyed life on earth. And my country, Greenland, is the richest land on earth left with minerals. And everybody is knocking on my door to want to get hold of this mineral. How should I be as a spiritual guide for my people? Should I open the door for everyone who knocks? Then I had to collect myself to be strong and spread my wings to be equal again. Without that equality on my wings, I can never lift. Nor can you. Nobody can lift. Just like mother and father. Mother is always closest to the heart. That's the mother's wing. Man's wing is far away from the heart. The couple can never lift if the wings are not equally strong. Impossible. So all this has to do with environmental health, spiritual health, physical health, mental health, psychological health, and all the other aspects of life, as you mentioned earlier. Everything depends on you, the way you are. Because after all, no matter how we look at it, there's only one earth. And you and me, we are the citizen of this earth. We may look different, but we are the citizen. You and I, we are responsible for that land we live on. And we lost that. You can see it. One day I would love to welcome you to my country, because this is the only land on earth where there has never been war. Can you imagine? The only land on earth where people live where there has never been war. When you come and step on my land, that land has never known war. I know you cannot imagine it because everywhere else I have traveled, they had wars. That impacts the health of the human world, the animal world, the plant world, the mineral world, and all the elements of that earth.
And I think this priority of the health of our world and of people and our planet, it's I take it as a word of warning that the minerals that are the next big frontiers and which are also at the center of the next energy transition. And when we think about the transition to clean energy, we also need to remind of not getting into the same fossil fuel trap, because we're heading towards a same big exploration in that area. And I would like to go to David, where Eden Project, it's a place, to quote your team, started from a dereliction. And it's becoming an amazing, thriving place that gives us great hope about what we can actually do with environment where we have probably gone a little bit heavy-handed. Tell us your story, David.
Well, thank you, Federica, and it's a real honor to be on this wonderful panel. I think, as it happens, I've been to 75 countries as well, and right now 76 is going to be Greenland. So I think that everyone's coming. So look, I think the reality is human health and planetary health are clearly inextricably linked. And there's been calls for green. Let's not forget the blue either as well, the marine environment, which is so important. And what you see in the building that we're in, if you go in, is a route through the earth and also a route through the oceans at the start of that. And the Eden Project, if you don't know it, we took an abandoned clay mine at the end of its useful life. It was derelict, it was sterile. It had been consumed by humans, and that was 25 years ago. If you go there today, it's a little oasis within the sort of former mining area. And the reason that we did that was to demonstrate that actually the future remains ours to make, that you can take places that are apparently hopeless, and that you can breathe new life into them. And it acts as a little flag in the ground, an exemplar project. Rather like the building here that we're sitting in and that we were so proud to be part of. I think one of the challenges here, there's a couple of architects on the panel here, and is that design really should seek to connect us to each other, but also to the natural world. But it shouldn't only be the architects. You know, that we mustn't give the architects too much freedom, mustn't give the urban planners too much freedom. One of the things that we need to think about is actually how do we allow creative thinking in this world to allow that those long-term solutions, because we've got brilliant scientists here as well, and we've got some brilliant communicators. One of the problems was, and I include Eden in this, by the way, is we're a science institution. If the world science centres were actually any good, would we be in the mess that we're in today? And the answer must be no. So therefore, we have to look to our education systems as well, which I know is not the theme of the panel today, but we have to look to them to educate people to think in the long term, to think about the whole, not just their own little piece. And I think that the final thing I wanted to just say is there is an opportunity here, not just for working together, but to create examples, to create exemplars that do demonstrate, as I firmly believe, that the future remains ours to make. We have to allow people their imagination. We have to build on some of the stories that Uncle has just told us, build on the facts that we've heard, build on the skills of the architects. I don't know who it was that said, by the way, that I'll probably quote this wrong, but that we have Neanderthal emotions, medieval systems, and godlike tech. It's not a great combination when you think about it in one way, but anyway, that's an aside. I think, the final thing I feel we need to grab that imagination, and we were talking before that buildings also need soul. You want places that you want to be, and I think we have to help people to get there so that they can feel better when they're recovering from their NEOPS and whatever else it is.
And to go into the world of connecting architecture and imagination, then Royal, the Philippine Pavilion actually goes to the core of some of these messages. I was there this morning, and I went to for a refresher, and I actually had goosebumps, and I felt it was really resonating with this World Majlis. And if the technical team could actually project some of the images.
Well, first, thank you so much. And wow, it's a beautiful conversation. I'm very much excited with the way things are actually unveiling, with of course, from the scientists, from Uncle, from David, from everybody. As an architect, we're both here as architects, and I think it's important, like what David also just mentioned, that we were talking about having a soul in terms of what I don't call it architecture if it doesn't have a soul. I call it a building. I think in every one of us as human beings, I think it's important because we are all part of the thing that we have to do to save our world, our life. And I as an architect, I started finding out a philosophy which I would love to share today, because I think this became my very foundation in everything that I do, which I think in the principles of architects and whoever will create should have a guiding compass or a North Star. So in 27 years ago, I found my first philosophy as nature is peace, where I always felt nature is peaceful. That to the point that even an erupting volcano for me is peaceful. Just don't get in the way because it's going to be dangerous. Right? But I think this is quite an important thing, because once you're able to establish a source of peace as a human being, I think that is a very strong foundation of life. Why do we call ourselves, restless? Why do we call ourselves sometimes to the point that we're stressed out? Because we always feel that we don't have peace. But imagine you discover peace with nature. And then that's 27 years ago. But then as I moved towards my years of being an architect, I always had an issue of, if my nature is my peace, and every time I build a building, I have to cut a tree, it violates my very principle that I'm almost like cutting my arm whenever I cut a tree. So I said to myself, no, this cannot be. I have to change the mindset that man and nature, which is the second philosophy, is never man and nature. It's man is nature. We are one with nature. And from that day on, it changed the way I see nature. I love nature the way I love myself. And before I even touch anything, I will definitely think about it. And I think that's a principle that we can all take. Either you're an engineer, you're a developer, you're a scientist. I mean, all of us, it can be something as a reference. And the third is the actual concept of the variety of the world, where I believe that the world is a potluck. That geographically, we are put in the UAE, we are in the Philippines, Italians, and the French. I never believe in competition. I always believe in refinement. That as a Filipino, as French, as Italians, we have to refine ourselves. We have to keep refining ourselves to the point that once we're refined, we have a gift to offer to the world. And imagine a world with so much champions of creations. And that leads to respect and confidence. Why? Because you start to respect the variety of another country, of another nationality. Then you start to also believe in yourself because you know that the thing that you just have to keep doing is to refine yourself so that you have something to offer later on. So I think it's always about not believing that there's somebody superior or somebody's inferior, but I think it is about that we are all equally important as the rest of anybody else in the world. So I think these principles, these philosophies, I'm sharing today to everyone because I think it celebrates so much of nature inside me and in my architecture, in my designs, and in fact, in my way of life. Not even in my profession, but it is actually my way and the way I live. And I hope that everybody can have something to take home. Thank
Professor Nino, I saw you taking notes. Is
I will write a book after.
is there anything you would like to share in terms of, from your scientist point of view, in terms of what you've heard?
Well, I'm listening to the architect, to both of them, and I mean we have a bigger theme here, and I'm really wondering how you see the challenge of planning not just buildings, which you do beautifully. I saw that also on the website. It's fantastic, and I mean driving with the metro through Dubai. This is like an exposition of architecture. Beautiful. But how do you plan to connect those houses? I think we miss the urban planning perspective, and I wonder what you think on those, because without smart planning of the urban space, we don't get the healthy city done, no matter how beautiful your houses are.
So taking that, to one step further, if I may, is how do the commercial logic allows also that particular planning to take place? Because I think there's always, an economic value that we all need to take into account, and it's probably going to be the elephant in the room in this conversation, because we can all agree with each other that it's wonderful that we put health first, that we put spirituality and well-being first, but then ultimately, as Sir Tim Smith would say, an accountant comes in and, all of these great ideas go all out the window. And maybe we should have had a chief financial officer in this Majlis today. Would you like to pick it up, Ahmed, and Habiba as well? Or do you
Yeah,
want to go?
thank you very much. While they were discussing, yes, we are talking about buildings, but, I would like to mention here that there are millions and millions of people that are homeless. So the basic things that we take for granted is not available there. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, is sustainable cities and communities. But in reality, what one of the strong messages that needs to be underlined, and that is being called by the UN Habitat, is that we should provide affordable, healthy housing for everybody, everywhere, all the time. And that is just, words on the paper. How do you translate that to reality in every part of the world? How do you build a building that is healthy, that gives the kind of environment that you need for the people living in there, but at the same time it is affordable? And so you cover one of the major challenges that humanity is facing in the 21st century. I'm putting this as a question, really, Frederica.
Who wants to build on that?
Yeah, I can take it. You see, I have dual roles, architecture and urban planner within the government authorities. So what I noticed from a lot of the submissions is, as you said, one of the major issues that we need to tackle is affordable housing. And currently, as per the statistics, I think, from what I understand, from your daily living, your cost, almost 50% should be, if you're already spending 50% of what you make on housing, you're already losing out. Actually, it's supposed to be more towards 20 to 30%. Then you're talking about affordable housing. And if we were to adapt that to the context of the UAE, most of you can say the affordable housing field is mostly attuned to, you can say, more of the little bit on the higher range, medium to higher range. So what we try to convey is that as architects, there is no real differentiation between architecture, which is developed between the high-end range or the middle range versus something that is more affordable, because they're one and the same. If you tackle that, you can tackle the issues of the city in general, where you don't really need to categorize certain zones when you say that a certain zone is owned by a certain developer and certain zone is allocated for a certain type of housing. Nowadays, there was a recent survey when they brought in expats and Emiratis and people from other fields of blue collar, white collar workers. And they all raised their hands when they said, do you even mind if you're living in a zone where it's not with other communities? Like, do you really want to be around people from your own communities? And the answer was that no, nobody really minds. So we can all live together. And the architecture or the urban plan, first of all, you need to get the architecture right, because in the end, the whole topic is about human-centric design. If you get the human-centric design, in traditional Islamic or Arab cities, it's a much more organic and cellular pattern. If you get the central core right, you can easily expand it on a bigger sense. You do need green spaces, but there's a lot of issues faced with green spaces in the context of UAE, because for us, for a developer, to maintain a green space is cost. However, if you don't combine that with technologies even used, if you talk to Duncan from Desert Inc., who worked on the sustainability pavilion, he himself as an expat did things that the local community didn't do, which was he took the plants which were neglected in the city, he created a nursery for them and grew them, and then represented that to the local community where they understood the value of that. And that's what we're doing. We're reverting back to a system which, if we show back to a global community, they can accept it. So it's very important for the designers, the urban planners, and the decision makers to all connect together, because it takes risk from both sides. It's something new from the design side, and it's also something that decision makers may not be comfortable with, because it's not your typical feasibility study. You cannot measure it through a return on investment over 3 to 5 years or 10 years. So it is kind of a joint leap of faith, and people know what is right and what is wrong. So you kind of, going back to Uncle, we have to follow our spirit and our wings for that balance.
David, you want to make it?
No, I'm so glad you mentioned Desert Ink and the planting, using plants actually from this region in and around here and playing that back. There's not very many good things that came out of the pandemic, as far as I'm concerned. But one that I think is the idea that our local areas have become incredibly important to us. And I speak from my own country in Britain. Localism has come to mean a sort of sense of parochialism and has been seen as a negative, whereas I think actually over the last couple of years, it was wonderful. I remember 2 years ago, I'm lucky enough, I live in a rural area, but you saw the snowdrops come out, and then you saw the primroses come out, and then you saw the daffodils, and everybody was talking about birdsong as well, and those things that were happening. And what I think we've got to do is remember that what's a global solution? A global solution is a series of locals added together. And I think as we take, you're talking about different people with, in poverty and so on. It doesn't have to be that they have to have a different solution. Actually, what we need is these example projects that allow people to live their lives in their locales and access the same things, because actually they'll then be more healthy and will also reduce things like carbon footprint and so on of people coming in there. So I absolutely agree with you, and that sort of we're beguiled, aren't we, by the exotic, that which is far away, when actually the stuff that's in front of us sometimes is incredible.
And I'm going to come for in a second to the audience if you have questions, but I wanted first to ask Joachim a question. How does you work a lot with technology and smart data, and Habiba has certainly talked about how whether it's indoors or even outdoors, we can use technology. What are the solutions that you see that can support sort of this movement towards improving our cities?
Thank you. It's a nice question. When in my previous intervention, when I was so convinced that we could have a new health, in fact, I was based in the support of the technology, of new technology. And what is the technology? In my opinion, it's data, big data, digitalization, and this could change and is changing in somehow the future of health. If I can go a little bit back, I think that we, the mankind, in somehow we made, to be moderate, some mistakes in the last years. I think now we have the opportunity of combining the achievements, the important achievements that you could gain from technology, with the balance, with the coming back to the origins, with the respect for the nature. And I think this could be the, in my humble opinion, of course, this could be a way of, because when we are talking about health, we have to take into consideration that our actual expectancy of life at birth is double than in the beginning of the 20th century, and this was achieved mainly because of the technology. So perhaps what we failed was it that sometimes, perhaps too much times, but sometimes we didn't consider all the factors of the equation. And this could be the next movement. Going back to your question and briefly, all the big questions that we have and big challenges that we have in health, when we are talking about R&D, when you are talking about management, when we are talking about treatment, most of the answers will come from the intelligent use of data. And we have now a tremendous knowledge in this field. If we could use it in the right way, I think we could have some success.
And data, and then I promise I'll come to the audience for our. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just add, because data is mentioned, and I think that's very critical in the modern world, no? Because there's so much ways to get data, and that's good, because before we don't get to really discover all this data. You don't know how to harness them also, but now that we have data, I think the combination is about creativity. After gathering the data, in fact, when I always dream, I speak for my country, I always dream of a modern Philippines. And a modern Philippines is not about a look of modern. It's about betterment, a better Philippines. And when I say that, I always envision something that can move forward. But then the idea is, how can you bring something? We're not first world. We're not like Dubai or the UAE, wherein you have so much oil. But the idea is, we have to even coin it. I call it practical luxury, where I feel that we all deserve a better life. And that's why I call it practical luxury, where every Filipinos, or even everybody in this world, deserves luxury by design.
Yes.
It should be by design. And I was so surprised when the first time I presented also my philosophy here in the Expo and the Philippine Pavilion, a Brazilian architect came to me after the event, and then he asked me, Architect Royal, can I bring practical luxury to Brazil? Because we're almost the same. We have natural resources, we have beautiful islands, beaches, and everything, but we're still not progressing. I mean, we're on the way, but I believe that what you said is that as long as we're creative, even if it's a simple architecture, it can even be what we call a nipa hut or a thatched roof architecture. But if it's well designed, I can even have it rented out in a B&B for $500 a night. I mean, but if it's well designed, but meaning to say, design and creativity together with data will lead us to a very smart and intelligent solution. And I think that will spare us all. I think somehow, somewhere in the past, mankind splurged. We shopped, we spent, we overused our resources. Suddenly, now we feel guilty because we're now afraid of the threat. So this is where I think practical luxury continuously gives us that awareness that there is so much data, and then be creative. That's what I think.
You have Nina?
Yeah, well, let me just briefly challenge a bit what's going on here. There is a very important missing piece here for me, particularly if it's about data and everything I hear here. I think we should be clear, if there is no policy that we agree on where we want to go, we will never do the right thing. And I mean, tomorrow I will give a talk on air pollution and why one can reach goals and why not in the global scene, in the Swiss Pavilion, if you want to know here more. But I think in all these domains, I mean, architects do not just build what we now nicely believe should be the right thing. They only do that, and the urban planners, if there is a policy somewhere. So we need to agree what is the policy. And if we agree that we want to have bike lanes wherever we build a house and another house and we want to connect them, you must build bike lanes. And if we don't say that, you mentioned that before, because of the costs, nobody will build a bike lane. We were fighting for bike lanes in Switzerland for 30 years, and it has made huge progress. But not just by coincidence. I think there is a lack in the discussion here of we need policies which define where we want to go.
we'll make sure we'll address the policies for sure. Uncle, and then we'll come back to policies.
It's so interesting about architects and technologies and how you can live. And I was given a task by my parents to build a center for healing for my people, or for Greenland. But then I took my great aunt when she was 86 years old to Brazil, which one was to Brazil, to the big forest. And my father's youngest brother, I took them down there because the Kundanavas came to Greenland. So we went to visit them. And it's so interesting to meet them down there. And then, because I've been asked to build the Center for Healing. And my great aunt, in her own wisdom, my father's aunt, said it's going to have to become Center for Healing for the world. So I've been working at it since 1969 to raise the funds and to design it. And I wanted to design it in which it meets that spiritual need, but that physical need, that mental needs, that psychological needs, that loss of language needs, and all the aspects. And it's so interesting. I've been working for so long. And then I realized that there are so many ideas, the architectural design, there's so many ideas, the environmental design, so many ideas of psychological needs of that house and the building. So I'm really so excited that I'm doing that. It has opened my eyes and my spirit so much because I realized wherever I had traveled that new buildings are very different than the old ones. I was growing up in stone house, sod house, stone and sod. My great-great-grandfather's house, which is now more than 500 years old. Then my mother and father became modern and built a house, the wooden one, but it lasted only 25 years. But my ancestor's house was more than 500 years. So I said, wow. And then now cement houses full of, what's it called, that foam and stuff like that. And then the modern man, I'm not talking about you as architects, but who don't understand the environment I come from, built it to the enormous cost for the government, and they last only 30 years. So now I have been charged that I have to create a house of Center for Healing which should last hundreds and hundreds of years. It's going to be, I'm so happy to meet you both, and you and everyone else, because now I can see the world better, having met you, and then traveled around the world to see how people live. From a simple teepee of sealskin or igloo to a modern building which will last hundreds of years. How do I do that? So maybe one day we can have a cup of coffee and then talk. How do we do that? How do we create an environment which balances everything all these people need? Whatever culture they come from, whatever psychological conditions they're in, or environmental conditions, how do we do that?
And that, I think, leads us back to the question also of policy. How do you create an enabling environment that allows, that kind of construction, that doesn't allow other kind of construction, that involves, the citizens, that addresses the lifestyles? It was in one of our World Majlis, we have the person from Spain that works in the Ministry of New Urban Agendas, which is the new name for the Ministry of Transport. So it's very much about how you put even in the terminology and the naming we use, a much broader perspective on, prioritizing quality of life and lifestyle, and then have a much more integrated point of view. So it's not whether I build another 10 kilometers of cycling lanes, but actually how do I rethink how I operate in that space. I think you have something you want to say, David, but before, I wanted to, Dr. Tom, would you mind commenting on that? And how do you plan and bring that health perspective early on into the planning? And do we have enough health planners that are working with Ahmed?
So, I mean, one of the common themes that people have touched upon, and I will come back to your question, I will answer it, is purposeful exposure to solar UV radiation. And by that I mean, do we spend enough time outside in the sunlight? So, different architects and planners have spoken about interior design, exterior design, maximizing light coming through into buildings. All mammals' circadian rhythms, their sleep-wake cycles are regulated by daylight. When daylight hits your retina in the morning, your serotonin increases. It's a hormone that energizes you, makes you feel happy. Obviously, here in the UAE, we're blessed that we have 12 hours of daylight or sunshine a year. But if you look in the northern hemisphere, in the winter, you do get things such as subdronal seasonal affective disorder, where because people aren't getting enough daylight, their serotonin levels are lower, they're not as happy, they're more likely to, so it's lower mood, they're more likely to eat, carbohydrates which make them feel happier. So, I mean, that's a bit of a sidestep from your question, but it was just making me think that at some point we should talk about light. We've spoken about green spaces briefly, but we should talk about light at some point.
Sorry to interrupt, but probably we should spend maybe 50% inside the building.
We should, not 90%. I would like then to come back as well on the policy issue, please.
Welcome. Yes, sure.
I mean, with the policies, I think, one thing that's been shown from COVID and certainly here in the UAE, how we managed to, deal with it so effectively was having all the stakeholders involved. And I think if you've got a unified vision and you've got an end goal, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, scientists, industry, everyone was involved in the decision making. It was data driven. It was scientific here. But you need everyone. We had a command and control center here in Dubai, and we had representatives from the transport sector, healthcare, all the government sectors, private sector. And I think unless you have, that's quite rare to have all those different players in the same room together. So I think that's for policies to be developed and to get engagement from both the people that are in that room, but also the people that it affects, then I think you need everyone involved. But I'll hand over to my colleague, Habiba.
Thank you very much. I actually wanted to talk about the policy, Frederica. Nowadays, with your theme, connecting minds and creating the future, this is absolutely true. The world has become so much connected and there are so many policies all over the place. What is required is we have like a window shopping, I choose what suits me and how can I bring that and adapt it and adopt it to suit my requirements. But what we are seeing really in the UAE is that keenness from the urban developers, the developers, for the architects, the engineers and everybody, to look at where are the standards that are there, what are the criteria that are there, how can I bring it here. They want to be at the forefront, they want to win, they want to pride themselves that my development has really fulfilled this kind of standards on the global level. So they are looking at it maybe from a marketing perspective, because that's definitely a new angle that opens for them new markets. But in doing that, they are serving the environment and they are ensuring that their buildings will be there for a long time, that the buildings will be catering to what the modern understanding of a healthy building should be. And last but not least, today on the table in the UAE, we are talking about net zero buildings. What do we mean by net zero buildings? So again, this is something that is very interesting, that is something that has intrigued, and everybody is curious to want to know about it. And there was just recently, Majid Al Futtaim, one of their malls were declared net zero. It means what they are producing and what they are consuming equalize itself, so it neutralizes it, so you have a net zero. And this is where the direction is if you're looking from the global perspective, because that is one of the strongest elements to deal with climate change from the built environment perspective. So I think policies, as you mentioned, is very important. It should be in the education institutions as well.
David?
I agree. I mean, look, policymakers need some safe spaces, don't they, to be innovative or whatever. And one of the problems is that, you know, that old mantra, nobody got fired for buying IBM, is part of the problem, i.e. the safe choice is the one that keeps you your job. So we've got to create spaces that allow that. We have an example at Eden in Cornwall where we ourselves have just dug the deepest geothermal mine in Britain. So it's 5 kilometers down, because what you know as you go down into the earth is it gets warm. And if you can extract that heat, then you can eventually turn it into electricity. That was not government policy. It took a private charity to do that, to prove that technology. And by the way, now what they're saying is that geothermal can account for 20% of the UK's power needs. Now that thinking wasn't even on the table 10, 15 years ago, even though there was data, even though there was a policy, because it was a bit risky. Oh, it's far easier to stick with coal or nuclear or, you know, wind. There's nothing against wind and solar, by the way, which are part of the solution. So somebody mentioned earlier about money, you know, in here, and you mentioned my colleague and friend Tim complaining about accountants. I'm going to confess to being one right now. I'm not putting a, you know, and he's absolutely right. What we need in today's world is we need a different sense of returns. It's not a, you know, it's not a given right that you should double your money in 5 years, is it? You know, we need to think about the long-term returns that are going on, and I see government and private enterprise and policy sort of moving in this direction. Really what we've got to do is ask the question, which is perhaps something like, you know, if you look after the environment, if you look after human health around you, then you are our friend. But if you poison our air, if you poison our water, you know, if you do bad things to the environment and bad things for people's health and well-being, then you're treasonous to the future, if you will, aren't you? And I think we should be setting policy in that way.
And health is certainly a currency that is far more valuable than money. And how can we build that in? We don't have a lot of time left, but I want to keep sort of a chance for somebody in the audience to ask a question. But to do that, I would also put somebody on the spot who's here on the front line. It's a PhD student, Magda, with Professor Nino, and you're working in lifestyle. I would like to give you a chance to ask a couple of people a question.
Thank you so much, Federica, for this opportunity. And I am overwhelmed by the amount of information you have shared today with us. You're a very diverse group of experts. So I was thinking, okay, my conclusions here are we all deserve a healthy space to live. We have different cultures, so each of you have a different point of view of how this healthy space should be. But what it's a commonality among all of us here today is that we are human beings. And as human beings, we also need to be able to have the chance to live in those spaces, to have, the opportunity to choose healthy lifestyle behaviors. Because sometimes it's not a matter just only knowing that if I go outside and eat a hamburger or something like that, fast food, oh, this is wrong, I should be eating salad. Sometimes people just don't have the chance to choose that. So my question to you is, how can we create awareness, and this comes close to the final topic you were talking about with politicians, with the people that has the power to create the opportunities for us, the people living in those spaces, wherever they are, to access to have the opportunity to have a healthy diet, to have the opportunity to move, to be being physically active, to avoid having to breathe a polluted air or contaminated air, to have the chance to drink healthy water, pure water. So how can we reach these people? Which experience have you in this pathway to create awareness? And I'm happy to hear that some governments or some politicians are already open, but I know this is not an easy pathway. So how can we manage this, creating more awareness about this topic?
Well, Magda, I think this is thank you. This is a perfect kind of closing question. And while it's, I don't think, possible to find the solution from the complete solution, but why don't we ask each and every one to what you can do from the point of view where you stand, from the architect, from the scientist, from Eden, from the technology cluster, and what can we learn from each one of you? So we'll go around with one final quick round.
What we can do, or
what respond to what we can do from where you stand from.
My main role is to convey the role of capturing data, or in hopes of capturing data to capture citizen participation. Because right now we have a lot of developments and it's still going on. And I think to capture citizen participation in those developments is crucial to the way the city will evolve. And the reason why I say that is that we have a lot of, in response to the doctor's, you can say, friendly challenge, but there are a lot of policies currently going on in the background. I'm lucky enough to be part of the health and well-being pillar of the new Dubai 2040 plan. And there are a lot of big questions being asked currently about, for example, connectivity of metro stations and catchments. So as Magda said, rightfully, the main point is how can you give the option for a person? Maybe one day I wake up, I don't want to take my car to work. I want the option to take the metro, but right now I can't really comfortably walk to the metro. I need to know that last mile, the first mile, the second mile. And also I do want to take, I was lucky enough to study in Japan for 3 years. I had a bicycle. I lost almost 20 kilos without even exercising. I was living a healthy lifestyle automatically without even thinking of exercising. So I think we should all be given that privilege. And I think Dubai is the right atmosphere, and we have the right decision makers, the thought leaders. We have all the people are all aligned. It's just the basic idea of connecting all those dots, which is the difficult part, because currently everybody looks at it as a zoning. So everybody looks at it, I think Robert knows more than me, he can talk about it, but currently it's like this is the building, this is the right of way, and this is the road, and so forth. But actually it's all what we can see from, I think what COVID has taught us is that it's a joint responsibility, and one person has the effect to change an entire world, either negatively or positively. So the sooner we work together to achieve that single vision, the easier it is to find a solution to the issue that Magda is raising and anybody is raising. So just to have a healthy, unified design process for everything, capturing citizen participation.
Thank you. Oh, so I'm officially running over. I am aware, but so and we still have the short performance that we need to take into account. So
is that for me to be concise, is it? So I thought hopefully my point will segue nicely from the point Ahmed was making. How do we change behaviour? So we didn't get a chance to get onto public, to active transport. But if I use that as an example, if we look at the social, ecological model of behaviour change, you need to influence multiple levels to change behavior. So you have some things at the individual level, which would be me forming habits, me having a bicycle that would enable me to cycle. You need things at the family or community level. Do other people in my family cycle? Do they support me cycling to work? And then you move up the meso and the macro level. So the macro level would be more, the policies, the infrastructure, the government, does my workplace support active commuting? Are there showers? You know, maybe I know in the UK there are some funding mechanisms to buy your bike for you, and you know, is there the transport infrastructure for me to walk or cycle safely to work? So I think you need to intervene at multiple levels to enact change.
So I think the answers are all around us. There are fantastic exemplars. There's one across the road here, the New Zealand legal recognition of the river, that if you go into their pavilion is a brilliant one. As you said, you also need people at the top with the right vision. I mean, Dubai's 2040 vision is fantastic, and you know, when it was announced, people went, "How are they going to do that?" And now people are going, "Wow, they're going to do it." You know, we need that as well. And I come back to that point about education as well. That if I could do one thing in Britain, it would be that we put natural history back onto the curriculum, because people don't learn about the natural world and our connection to it. We're a part of nature, not apart from nature. And the faster that we start reminding people and using stories like yours, Uncle, and all of the science and data around it, the better we'll be.
Perhaps not from the point of view of technology, but I think that our life insurance, to go in the right way, is to have an informed, participative and active public opinion. And this has to do what you said, education. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in a public opinion, because our leaders, our politicians, okay, they have very good ideas, but it's important that we keep an eye on them.
How do I carry on in my life, coming from an ancient world to a modern world? How do I do that? My balance. I had to learn to adapt myself to these most modern technologies we have today without losing my identity as an indigenous person. And how do I use the land without destroying the land? How do I use the water without losing it? How do I breathe the air without polluting it? So those are these simple, basic questions my eldest speaks about to me, because I'm the one who's carrying that to the time to come by creating a whole village. How do I do that? I cannot do it alone. I need all that circle, which has no beginning nor ending, in which we all belong. The beauty of the circle is that we cannot see each other's backs, which means you cannot backbite and put each other down. And how can you do that when you sit in a circle? Because all you look at is their beauty. But that beauty is in the spirit of each person. And that beauty enhances by the technologies of people, learned people like you, who can bring that balance to a new world. After all, I am not alone on earth. I met you today. You enhanced my world, realized that I am not alone. And the beauty of you is you have expanded my capacity.
Well, public health science is full of success stories. And if you summarize those, or you may read Factfulness and you'll see all these success stories, it is about shaping the future through policies that we agree on. And then we can reach a lot of progress. So I'm very optimistic.
Abiba.
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful question. My answer is education and education and education.
For me, as an architect, because again, there's so many ways to approach it, and definitely there's really no one particular single answer. But as an architect, I think it's always the challenge of being able to create an example a tangible one, a real one. Because people they discover on their own, they experience. And that's the best way to somehow educate somebody. Um, in fact, it's easy to create a decision that this is a progressive country when you see architecture. When you see, it becomes an easy measure of the status of a country. But then I think being able to create and present a very smart and I would say a wise design, a good design that celebrates humanity, nature, and everything, I think we have to be able to create that, put it together, make it real, and make it an experience for the people. But how do you do that with money being involved? That's why I call it practical luxury. Because for me, if there's a dream to make the life of a person better, it doesn't have to be constantly expensive. Look at our ancestors. They built nipa huts, but it was practical. It was protecting them from the storm and from the predators. They're not architects. They're just practical. So us as architects now, it would be a shame that we couldn't fix it or solve the problem. So I think that sample, that very example of the solution should be implemented. And again, it should be for the people. Then you educate everyone. It's not just for the high end because it's only the developer who can spend so much and only few can also afford to be in that space, that healthy space. No. The challenge to every government is to make a practical luxury, a design that celebrates people. And I think that becomes a quick awareness because a person who goes through that park and walks through that building suddenly gets uplifted because of the experience of design. You know, a person in a cave, there was a study, a person in a cave living for so many months behaved like a caveman. They were making that behavioral study. And then that guy, after so many months, brought into a 5-star hotel, suddenly took a shower, and there was a book beside the lamp, and he took the book, he slept on the bed, even ate with a fork. It's that environment that will educate you. So it's a very important thing to be able to put together an environment. And again, this is not just for the architects. These are, again, everyone, because everybody's going to put their ideas on the table, also like the finance and everyone, you know.
But with these two big messages, I think it's now if Ahmed is inviting citizens to be part of that, I think that the responsibility on the citizens themselves becomes greater to be educated and to be informed and to look at their facts. And I think with the big aspirational theme of this World Majlis week, with our other sessions on health, is what if the health of others became our number one priority? And we'll try and answer these questions with a couple of more World Majlis this week. I hope many of you will be able to join us. And I'm going to thank everybody, Ahmed, Tom, David, Joachim, Uncle, Nino, Habiba, and Royal. And thank you, Magda, and thank you, Dr. Robert, as usual, to be such a pillar of support, even in the preparation of this World Majlis. And thank you to the World Majlis team. I think we have a short performance that is brought to us by the Swiss Pavilion from the brilliant performers of the Accademia Dimitri, and apologies for the delay. Thank you very much, everybody. And I think we have been left with a moment that's also to touch our heart. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time. Our participants are going to be around here for a few minutes if you would like to meet them, talk to them, and exchange further views. Thank you very much.